Good morning. I want to talk to you today about something we all deal with: worry. We carry things we were never meant to carry. We try to figure out things only God can figure out. We stress over our future, our finances, our health, and our relationships. But here's the key: worry doesn't take away tomorrow's problems. It only takes away today's peace. God never designed us to live weighed down, discouraged, or full of doubt. He created us to walk in faith, trusting that He is in control. The moment we start to worry, that's the moment we need to make a decision. Will we try to handle this on our own, or will we give it to God? There's a scripture that says, "Cast all your cares upon Him, because He cares for you." That means you don't have to carry that burden. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to trust the one who does. When you release control, when you say, "God, I can't do this on my own, but I know you can," that's when you'll see His power work in your life. Maybe you're facing a challenge today. You're worried about your future, a medical report, or a child who's not making good choices. You've tried everything, and nothing is changing. But what if, instead of worrying, you turned it over to God? What if you chose to believe that He is already working behind the scenes? Think about a child riding in a car with their parents. They're not sitting in the back seat wondering if they'll get to their destination safely. They're not questioning every turn or stressing over traffic. Why? Because they trust that the person driving knows where they're going. It's the same way with God. He knows where you're going. He has a plan for your life. He's ordering your steps. The question is, are you going to sit in the back seat and enjoy the ride, or are you going to try to grab the wheel? God is saying, give it to me. Let me fight your battles. Let me handle the situation. But as long as you're trying to figure it all out, as long as you're striving in your own strength, He'll step back and let you do it. But when you say, "God, I'm giving this to you," that's when things begin to shift. Some of you have been carrying stress that doesn't belong to you. You're worried about things that are out of your control, but today is a new day. It's time to release the worry, to release the anxiety, and to walk in peace. When you give it to God, you're not giving up. You're stepping into a place of faith. And when you do, you'll see doors open, you'll see breakthroughs happen, and you'll see God do what only He can do. So today, make the decision. No more worrying, no more stressing, just trusting. Because when you give it to God, you're giving it to the one who holds your future in His hands. Stay in peace, stay in faith, and know that God is in control. Worry is something we all deal with at some point in our lives. It creeps in when we least expect it, filling our minds with fear, doubt, and uncertainty. It's easy to let worry take over, to dwell on all the things that could go wrong, and to feel overwhelmed by the unknown. But the truth is, worry doesn't solve anything. It doesn't change the outcome of a situation. It doesn't make things better, and it certainly doesn't bring peace. Instead, it robs us of our joy, drains our energy, and keeps us stuck in a cycle of stress and anxiety. When we worry, we're essentially trying to control something that was never ours to control in the first place. We think that by overanalyzing, overthinking, and stressing over a situation, we can somehow change it or make it better. But worry is a thief. It takes away our peace without giving us anything in return. It distracts us from living fully in the present because our minds are so consumed with what might happen in the future. God never intended for us to live this way. He never wanted us to walk through life burdened by fear and anxiety. Over and over again, Scripture reminds us to cast our cares on Him, to trust Him with our burdens, and to rely on His strength rather than our own. When we worry, we're essentially saying that we don't trust God completely. We're saying that we believe our problems are bigger than His power, that our challenges are beyond His ability to handle. But that's simply not true. God is bigger than anything we could ever face, and He has already gone before us to make a way. Think about the times in your life when you worried about something, only to look back later and realize that everything worked out just fine. The job you thought you wouldn't get, the financial struggle that seemed impossible, the relationship that felt like it was falling apart. Somehow, in ways you couldn't predict, things came together. Worry didn't change the outcome. It only made the process more difficult. What if, instead of spending that time in fear and anxiety, you had trusted God from the beginning? What if you had chosen to rest in the knowledge that He was already working things out for your good? There's a reason the Bible repeatedly tells us not to worry. God knew we would struggle with this. He knew our natural tendency would be to try and figure everything out on our own. But He also knew that worry would never bring us peace. The only way to experience real peace is to fully trust in Him. When we shift our focus from our problems to God's promises, we begin to see things differently. Instead of being consumed by fear, we start to feel a sense of calm. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, we begin to experience a quiet confidence, knowing that God is in control. Think about a child resting in their parents' arms. That child isn't worried about where their next meal is coming from or how the bills will be paid. They simply trust that their parent will take care of them. They have faith that their needs will be met. That's the kind of trust God wants us to have in Him. He wants us to believe that He will provide, that He will take care of us, that He will guide us through whatever we are facing. But too often we hold on to our worries instead of handing them over to Him. We carry burdens we were never meant to carry, trying to fix things in our own strength, when all along God is saying, "Give it to me. Let me handle it." Worry also stills our ability to enjoy life. It keeps us from fully embracing the present moment because we're so focused on what might go wrong in the future. We miss out on the beauty of today because our minds are preoccupied with tomorrow. But Jesus said, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." In other words, take life one step at a time. Trust that God will give you the grace you need for today, and that when tomorrow comes, He will provide for that as well. One of the biggest reasons people struggle with worry is because they feel like they have to have all the answers. They want to know how everything will work out, and when they don't have clarity, they start to stress. But faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. God doesn't always show us the full picture right away, but He does promise to lead us step by step. When we walk in faith, we don't have to see the whole path to know that God is guiding us in the right direction. Sometimes worry comes from a place of fear, fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of things not going the way we planned. But fear is not from God. The Bible says God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. That means when worry tries to take over, we have the power to reject it. We don't have to let fear dictate our decisions. We don't have to live in a constant state of anxiety. Instead, we can choose to trust that God's plan is greater than our fears. It's easy to trust God when everything is going smoothly. When life is good, when prayers are being answered, when doors are opening, trust comes naturally. But real faith is tested in the moments when things aren't going our way, when we're waiting for an answer, when we're facing a challenge, when we're in a season of uncertainty. That's when trust matters most. It's in those moments that we have to make a choice. Will we give in to worry, or will we stand firm in faith? One of the best ways to overcome worry is through gratitude. When we take time to remember all the ways God has come through for us in the past, it strengthens our faith for the present. Think about the times He has provided, the times He has protected you, the times He has made a way when there seemed to be no way. If He did it before, He can do it again. Focusing on God's faithfulness shifts our mindset from fear to trust, from anxiety to peace. Another way to combat worry is through prayer. Instead of letting your mind spiral with negative thoughts, take those concerns to God. Lay them at His feet and leave them there. When you pray, you're not just speaking words. You're actively handing over your burdens to the one who can actually do something about them. Prayer reminds us that we're not in this alone, that we have a God who sees us, hears us, and cares about every detail of our lives. It's also important to surround ourselves with faithful people. The voices we listen to have a big impact on our mindset. If we're constantly around negativity, doubt, and fear, it's easy to fall into the trap of worry. But when we surround ourselves with people who speak life, who encourage us to trust God, who remind us of His promises, it strengthens our faith. Sometimes we just need a reminder that God is bigger than what we're facing. Choosing to trust God doesn't mean challenges won't come. It doesn't mean life will always be easy or that we'll never face difficulties. But it does mean we don't have to walk through those challenges alone. It means that even in the midst of uncertainty, we can have peace, not because we have everything figured out, but because we know the one who does. Worry is a choice, but so is trust. We can either let fear consume us, or we can choose to rest in God's promises. We can either stress over things we can't control, or we can place them in the hands of the one who holds the universe. Every time worry tries to creep in, we have an opportunity to replace it with faith. We can remind ourselves that God is in control, that He is for us, that He is working all things together for our good. When we make that shift, we begin to experience the peace that only comes from trusting Him completely. Life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges our way. Situations arise that we never saw coming, problems that seem too big to handle, and obstacles that appear impossible to overcome. In those moments, our first instinct is often to try and take control. We start analyzing every possible solution, planning, strategizing, and doing everything in our power to make things work the way we want. But the truth is, there are many things in life that are simply beyond our control. No matter how much we think about them, worry about them, or try to fix them, some things are meant to be placed in God's hands. When we learn to release the need to figure everything out, we find peace in knowing that God is in control. It's human nature to want to understand everything. We want to know why something is happening, how it's going to turn out, and when we'll see a breakthrough. But faith doesn't require all the answers. Faith means trusting even when we don't understand, believing even when things don't make sense. Sometimes we waste so much energy trying to force outcomes that were never ours to control in the first place. We replay situations in our minds, analyze every detail, and stress ourselves out over things that only God can handle. But the moment we stop trying to control everything and start trusting Him, that's when we truly step into the peace He has for us. Think about a seed planted in the ground. Once it's placed in the soil, you can't see what's happening beneath the surface. You don't know exactly when it will sprout, how deep its roots are growing, or how tall it will become. But you trust the process. You know that with time, water, and sunlight, that seed will turn into something greater. In the same way, when we release control to God, we may not see immediate results. We may not know how things are working out behind the scenes, but we can trust that He is at work. Just because we don't see movement doesn't mean nothing is happening. Some of the greatest miracles take time to unfold. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to trust God is because they've been let down in the past. Maybe they prayed for something and it didn't happen the way they expected. Maybe they believed for a breakthrough, but the door remained closed. When things don't go our way, it's easy to question whether God is really in control. But what we have to understand is that just because something didn't happen the way we wanted doesn't mean God wasn't working. His plans are higher than ours. His timing is perfect, and He sees the full picture when we can only see a small piece. Think about times in your life when things didn't work out the way you planned, but later you realized it was for the best. Maybe you didn't get that job you wanted, but then a better opportunity came along. Maybe a relationship ended and you were heartbroken, but later you met someone who was truly meant for you. What felt like a disappointment at the time was actually God redirecting you towards something greater. If we could see what He sees, we wouldn't question the delays, the detours, or the disappointments. We would trust that everything is happening for a reason. Letting go of control doesn't mean we stop being responsible. It doesn't mean we sit back and do nothing. It simply means we do our part and leave the rest to God. We plant the seeds, but we trust Him to bring the harvest. We take the steps we can take, but we rely on Him to open the right doors. When we release control, we're saying, God, I trust that You know what's best for me. I believe that You are leading me in the right direction. That kind of faith allows us to live with peace, knowing that we don't have to have all the answers to know that God is working on our behalf. Sometimes the reason we struggle to trust God is because we are too focused on our own timeline. We want things to happen right away, but God's timing is different from ours. There are seasons of waiting that test our faith, moments when it feels like nothing is changing. But just because we don't see progress doesn't mean God isn't moving. The delay is not a denial. Some things take longer because God is aligning all the right pieces. If we rush ahead and try to force something before it's time, we may miss out on the fullness of what God has in store. Think about a puzzle. If you try to force a piece into the wrong place, it won't fit. You might try turning it, pressing it down, but no matter what you do, it's not going to work because it's not meant to go there. But when you step back and trust the process, eventually the right piece comes along and it fits perfectly. That's how life works. When we try to force things to happen on our own terms, we end up frustrated, stressed, and exhausted. But when we trust God's timing, things fall into place exactly the way they were meant to. Another reason people struggle to trust God is because they focus too much on what they see rather than what they believe. They look at their circumstances and think, there's no way this can work out. But faith is about believing beyond what we see. It's about trusting that even when things look impossible, God is still in control. The Bible says we walk by faith, not by sight. That means we don't base our trust on how things appear in the moment. We base our trust on who God is. There are so many stories of people in the Bible who had to trust God when things didn't make sense. Abraham was told he would be the father of many nations, but for years he and his wife Sarah couldn't have children. Joseph was given a dream that he would be a great leader, but before that happened, he was betrayed, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison. Moses was called to lead the Israelites to the promised land, but first he had to face Pharaoh and cross the Red Sea. In each of these situations, things didn't look good. There were moments of waiting, of hardship, of uncertainty. But in the end, God's promises came to pass. The same is true for us. Just because we don't see how things will work out doesn't mean God isn't moving. Just because the road seems difficult doesn't mean we're on the wrong path. God has a way of turning things around, of making the impossible possible, of bringing beauty from brokenness. But it all starts with trust. The more we release control, the more we experience His peace. One of the most freeing things we can do is shift our mindset from, I have to figure this out, to, God has already worked it out. That change in perspective allows us to rest, to breathe, to stop carrying burdens we were never meant to carry. It takes the pressure off of us and places it where it belongs, in God's hands. When we trust that God is in control, we stop striving, we stop stressing, and we start living with confidence. We may not know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. We may not have all the answers, but we know the one who does. That kind of faith brings peace that goes beyond human understanding. Life is full of uncertainty. Every day we face situations that require us to trust in something greater than ourselves. Some days it's easy to believe that everything will work out. Other days, when things don't seem to be changing, when prayers seem to go unanswered, when obstacles feel overwhelming, that's when faith is truly tested. Faith means letting go and believing that even when we don't see a way, God is working behind the scenes. It means trusting that even when circumstances don't look favorable, there is a plan unfolding beyond what we can comprehend. One of the biggest challenges people face when it comes to faith is the need for visible proof. The human mind craves certainty. We want to know exactly how things will turn out, when they will happen, and what steps we need to take to make it all work. But faith doesn't operate that way. Faith requires believing before seeing. It requires stepping out even when there is no visible sign of progress. When we plant a seed, we don't see immediate growth. For a while, it looks like nothing is happening, but beneath the surface, roots are forming and something is taking shape. The same is true in our lives. Just because we don't see progress doesn't mean nothing is happening. God works in ways that aren't always obvious to us. There are times when it feels like nothing is changing. You've prayed, you've believed, and yet the situation remains the same. It's easy to get discouraged in those moments and think that maybe things aren't meant to improve. But what if the delay isn't a denial? What if what you're believing for is in the process of unfolding, and the only thing required is for you to keep trusting? Too often people give up right before the breakthrough comes. They stop believing because they don't see results in their expected time frame. But just because God isn't moving on your schedule doesn't mean He isn't moving at all. Think about a construction site. When a new building is going up, the first phase often looks like nothing but dirt and foundation work. For weeks, sometimes months, there isn't much visible progress. But beneath the ground, the foundation is being laid, the structure is being strengthened, and everything is being prepared for what's coming. Then, seemingly all at once, the walls start rising, the building takes shape, and the vision becomes clear. That's how God works. There are seasons where it looks like nothing is happening, but in reality, God is laying the foundation for something greater. Sometimes the reason we don't see things happening is that we're looking in the wrong place. We expect God to move in a certain way, and when He doesn't, we assume nothing is happening. But God's ways are higher than our ways. He doesn't always answer prayers the way we expect. He doesn't always open the doors we want Him to open, but He is always working things together for our good. If one opportunity doesn't work out, it's because He has something better. If a door closes, it's because He is guiding us to something greater. Faith means letting go of our expectations and trusting that God's plan is better than our own. There's a story in the Bible about a man named Peter. One night, he and the other disciples were in a boat, and they saw Jesus walking on the water. Peter, full of faith, asked Jesus if he could come to him on the water. Jesus told him to step out of the boat. As long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked on the water. But the moment he started looking at the wind and the waves, he became afraid and began to sink. The lesson in this story is powerful. When we focus on God, we can do things we never thought possible. But when we focus on the circumstances around us, fear takes over and we begin to sink. How many times in life do we start off strong in faith, only to get distracted by the challenges around us? We believe that God is working, but then an obstacle appears and we start to doubt. We start to look at the problem instead of the promise. The moment we shift our focus from faith to fear, we begin to sink into worry, anxiety, and frustration. But if we keep our eyes on God, if we keep trusting, even when things don't make sense, we will see Him move in ways we never expected. Another challenge people face with faith is the fear of disappointment. They don't want to believe too much, hope too much, because they're afraid of being let down. But faith is not about playing it safe. Faith requires stepping out even when there are no guarantees. It requires believing that God's plan is good, even when we don't understand it. Some of the greatest breakthroughs in life come to those who are willing to believe beyond their current circumstances. Think about the people in the Bible who experienced miracles. They didn't receive them by playing it safe. They had to step out in faith. The woman with the issue of blood had to push through the crowd just to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. The blind man had to call out to Jesus even when others told him to be quiet. The 10 lepers had to walk in faith before they saw their healing. In every instance, action was required before the miracle took place. Faith is not passive, it's active. It requires trusting that something is happening, even when there's no visible proof. Faith also means surrendering control. Too often, we try to hold on to things that only God can handle. We want to figure out every detail, fix every problem, and make things happen on our own. But true faith means saying, God, I trust you with this. I don't have to understand everything to believe that you are working. That kind of trust allows us to live with peace. Instead of stressing over every detail, we can rest in the knowledge that God is already taking care of it. Think about how much time and energy is wasted worrying about things that never even happen. People stress about problems that don't exist, replay scenarios in their minds that never come to pass, and spend days anxious about things that God has already worked out. What if instead of worrying, we chose to trust? What if we lived each day believing that God is for us, that He is leading us, that He is working behind the scenes for our good? That kind of faith changes everything. One of the most important things to remember about faith is that it's a daily choice. It's not something we decide once and never have to think about again. Every day we have to choose to believe. When challenges arise, we have to choose to trust. When doubts creep in, we have to remind ourselves of God's faithfulness. Faith isn't just about believing when things are easy. It's about holding on to God's promises, even when everything around us says otherwise. Faith is not about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. It's about knowing that even in the waiting, even in the unknown, even in the challenges, God is still at work. Just because we don't see things changing doesn't mean He isn't moving. Just because we don't have all the details doesn't mean He doesn't have a plan. Faith means letting go, believing that God is in control and knowing that He is always working behind the scenes for our good. When we hold on to worry, fear, and anxiety, we carry burdens we were never meant to bear. Life was not designed for us to figure everything out on our own. There are things that happen beyond our understanding, challenges that seem too big, and problems that feel impossible. But the weight of those burdens isn't ours to carry. We were created to live in faith, to trust in something greater than ourselves, and to know that we are not alone in our struggles. God never intended for us to go through life feeling overwhelmed and exhausted from trying to handle everything on our own. The moment we learn to release our worries, the moment we stop carrying what was never meant to be ours, we experience a level of peace that can only come from true surrender. Many people go through life weighed down by stress. They worry about their future, their finances, their health, their families, and everything in between. Their minds are constantly racing, trying to predict outcomes, control circumstances, and make sure everything happens the way they think it should. But no matter how much we plan, no matter how much we try to anticipate every detail, life doesn't always go according to our expectations. There will always be uncertainties. There will always be things beyond our control. The key to living in peace is not in figuring everything out, but in learning to let go and trust. It's easy to believe that if we just think about something long enough, we can change the outcome. If we just worry enough, plan enough, analyze every possibility, then we can somehow make things work out the way we want. But worry doesn't change anything. Worry doesn't fix problems, open doors, or make anything better. All worry does is steal our joy, rob us of peace, and keep us stuck in a cycle of fear and doubt. The truth is, worrying is like carrying around a heavy backpack filled with unnecessary weight. It drains our energy, slows us down, and prevents us from fully enjoying life. Letting go doesn't mean we stop caring. It doesn't mean we ignore our responsibilities or stop making wise decisions. It means we do our part and trust that God will do His. We can't control everything, but we can control our response. We can choose faith over fear. We can choose to trust that even when things seem uncertain, God is still in control. When we release our worries, we open ourselves up to a peace that goes beyond human understanding. One of the main reasons people struggle to let go is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what might happen, fear of losing control. But the more we try to control things that aren't meant to be in our hands, the more anxious and frustrated we become. We think that by holding on tightly, we are protecting ourselves from disappointment. But in reality, we are only making things harder. True freedom comes when we realize that we don't have to have everything figured out. We don't have to know all the answers or predict every outcome. We can live with confidence, knowing that God already has a plan. Think about a child who is learning to swim. At first, they may be afraid of the water, nervous about letting go of the edge. They cling tightly, convinced that if they let go, they will sink. But the moment they release their grip and trust, they realize they can float. The water holds them up. The same is true in life. We spend so much time trying to hold on, trying to control every detail, when all along, if we would just let go, we would realize that we are being held. God is already carrying us. There are things in life that are simply beyond our control. We can't control what other people do. We can't control unexpected challenges. We can't always predict how things will turn out. But what we can control is our faith, our trust, and our ability to let go of what we were never meant to carry. Too often people spend their days consumed with worry over things that may never happen. They replay negative scenarios in their minds, overthink every situation, and allow fear to dictate their emotions. But when we shift our focus from worry to trust, everything changes. Instead of waking up each day wondering what will go wrong, we can wake up expecting good things. Instead of living in fear of the future, we can live with confidence that God is already there. Instead of holding on to burdens that were never meant to be ours, we can release them and walk in peace. Letting go is not about giving up. It's about giving it over to God. It's about recognizing that we don't have to do everything in our own strength. There's a story about a man who was carrying a heavy load on his back while walking down the road. A kind stranger in a wagon stopped and offered him a ride. The man gratefully accepted and climbed into the wagon. But instead of putting his burden down, he kept the heavy load on his back. When asked why, he said, "I didn't want to burden the wagon." The irony is the wagon was already carrying him. The extra weight made no difference. That's exactly how many people live their lives, holding on to stress, worry, and fear when God is already carrying them. When we trust, we are not saying that life will be perfect or that challenges won't come. We are saying that we refuse to carry unnecessary burdens. We are saying that we choose peace over stress, faith over fear, and trust over worry. Life is too short to spend it weighed down by things that were never meant to be in our control. When we let go, we make room for joy, for freedom, and for the kind of peace that only comes from knowing we are in good hands. Sometimes in life, we hold on to things that are no longer serving us. We cling to worry, fear, doubt, and anxiety because we think that if we let go, we will lose control. But the truth is, holding on is what keeps us stuck. We can't move forward while we're carrying the weight of the past. We can't step into God's best for us while we're still holding on to everything that didn't work out. every disappointment, every frustration, and every answered question. There comes a time when we have to release the weight, let go of what we don't understand, and trust that God is leading us exactly where we need to be. Letting go isn't always easy. Our minds want answers. We want to understand why things happened the way they did. We want to know why that opportunity didn't work out, why that person walked away, why the door we were praying for never opened. But faith doesn't always come with explanations. Faith is about trusting even when we don't have all the answers. It's about believing that just because we don't see the full picture doesn't mean that God isn't working. Think about driving a car at night. Your headlights only illuminate a few feet in front of you, but that doesn't stop you from driving. You trust that the road is there even though you can't see the whole journey. That's how life is. We may not be able to see the full picture, but we can trust that God has already mapped out our path. The problem is that too often we try to rely on our own understanding. We analyze, we overthink, and we stress over details that aren't ours to figure out. But the more we try to control things that aren't meant to be in our hands, the more anxious and frustrated we become. Letting go means trusting that God sees what we cannot. He knows what's coming. He knows which doors to open and which ones to close. What if the door that didn't open was actually protecting you from something? What if the relationship that ended was actually making room for something better? What if the opportunity that passed you by wasn't the best one for you? Just because we don't understand something in the moment doesn't mean that it wasn't part of a greater plan. We have to be willing to let go of the need to figure everything out. Some things will never make sense this side of heaven. Some situations will remain mysteries, but our job isn't to figure it all out. Our job is to trust. It's to believe that no matter what has happened, God still has a good plan for our lives. Holding on to the past, to bitterness, to frustration, and to disappointment only keeps us from experiencing the new things that God has in store. Think about carrying a bag filled with heavy rocks. Each rock represents something from the past, an unanswered question, a missed opportunity, a disappointment. The more we carry, the heavier the load becomes. But the moment we choose to set it down, we feel lighter, freer, more at peace. That's what happens when we release what we can't control. We stop carrying burdens that were never meant for us. We stop replaying situations that we can't change. We stop holding on to things that are only weighing us down. One of the greatest freedoms in life comes when we learn to release what's out of our control. We don't have to have all the answers to know that God is in control. We don't have to see the full picture to know that He is working all things together for our good. But as long as we are gripping tightly to our plans, our ideas, and our expectations, we won't be able to fully embrace what God has in store. Letting go requires trust. It requires believing that even if we don't understand why something happened, God does. It requires knowing that even when things don't go according to our plan, God's plan is still in motion. There are so many things in life that are simply not meant to be understood in the moment. Sometimes we only see their purpose when we look back. We realize that the delay was actually protection. The closed door was actually a redirection. The disappointment was actually a setup for something greater. Think about Joseph in the Bible. He had dreams of greatness, but instead of stepping right into his destiny, he was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison for something he didn't do. For years, nothing made sense. If anyone had a reason to hold on to bitterness, it was Joseph. But instead of dwelling on what went wrong, he chose to trust, and in the end, he became a ruler in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh, and he was able to save countless lives, including his own family. If he had spent his years in prison bitter about what happened, stuck in the past, he would have missed what God was doing. The same is true for us. If we spend all of our energy trying to figure out why things happened the way they did, we will miss what God is doing right now. We will miss the new opportunities, the fresh starts, and the doors that are opening because we are too focused on the ones that closed. There is a time for looking back and learning from the past, but there is also a time for moving forward. When we let go, we make room for peace. We make room for joy. We make room for God to do things in our lives that we never imagined. But as long as we are holding on to stress, fear, and frustration, we won't be able to receive the new things that He has for us. It's like trying to carry two suitcases at the same time, one filled with the past and one filled with the future. Until we set one down, we can't fully embrace the other. God's plan is always bigger than our mistakes, greater than our disappointments, and beyond what we could ever imagine. But we have to be willing to release what we can't control. We have to trust that just because we don't understand something doesn't mean that it isn't part of a greater purpose. Sometimes the things we think are setbacks are actually setups. The things that look like disappointments are actually leading us to something better. Letting go isn't about giving up. It's about giving in to a greater plan. It's about choosing faith over fear, trust over worry, and peace over stress. It's about recognizing that we don't have to have everything figured out to know that we are on the right path. When we choose to release what we can't control, we step into the freedom, the joy, and the peace that were meant for us all along.